After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. The tradition that Jesus was offered a drink whilst he was in agony on the cross appears in all four of the Gospels. Some translations describe it as sour wine, others as vinegar. To our modern ears, it sounds like a cruel denial to offer vinegar to a thirsty, dying man. In fact, it was simply the cheap wine commonly used by workers and soldiers to slake their thirst in the heat of the day, and was readily available at any workplace. For the Roman soldiers, of course, the execution of criminals was their day's work. So it was an act of humane pity for someone among the bystanders to offer Jesus a drink as they did. Except in the Gospel of Luke, where the wine is described being offered by the soldiers as a mocking gesture, ironically serving him as if he were a king. John's Gospel is the only Gospel description of this event in which Jesus articulates his thirst. In Matthew's and Mark's account, Jesus does not ask for help whilst on the cross. In those versions, his loud cry to God is mistakenly heard by the bystanders as a cry for Elijah to help him. In the Jewish tradition of the time, Elijah was revered as a provider of food and drink to those in distress, and so some respond by offering him a drink. But in John's Gospel, Jesus says clearly, "I am thirsty," which is generally taken as a request to be given a drink. And in John's Gospel, it seems it is the group standing nearby, including his mother and Mary Magdalene with some close disciples, who respond to his request with all the alacrity and compassion of family and friends attending to a loved one who is near to death. But it's not entirely clear that John's Gospel intends us to understand these words, "I am thirsty," as a cry for human help by Jesus. We are told the words are uttered in fulfillment of Scripture. Bible experts differ in their views on this. A common belief is that the Scripture it refers to is Psalm 69. And when we look at that psalm, we find it is the cry to God for help from one who has been persecuted and falsely accused by enemies, despite doing what is right and good. The psalmist prays that those who trust in God as he does will not be shamed or dishonoured because of what has happened to him. We read, "I am weary with my crying. My throat is parched. The insults of those who insult you have fallen on me." So what if those words, "I am thirsty," were not meant as a cry for a drink, whether of wine or water, but rather were a heartfelt prayer from the God in Jesus who shares our humanity to God the Father, a prayer spoken on our behalf, suffering humanity, for our searing thirst for life and joy to be quenched, for us to be set free from the shame and guilt of our human failure and sin. There is a precedent for this reading in St. John's Gospel itself. There was another occasion when Jesus did indeed ask for a drink of the Samaritan woman at the well. Here again, the event was not about him getting a drink, but an opportunity for Jesus to be revealed as the source of another refreshment, the living water, those who drink of which will never thirst again. On the cross of Christ, which John elsewhere described as Jesus being lifted up to draw everyone to him, Jesus' words, "I am thirsty," bring our all too human need of the life-giving water into the very heart of God, so that we may never again be thirsty and parched of the divine life that wells up within us when we are baptized in the water of Christ.